patterns and bring that experience that dedicated front-end devs have into the .NET world. Yeah, pretty typical stuff. Pretty typical stuff as far as what it includes. Sorry about that. So it has routing, forms, and validation. That's one thing that really drew me to Blazor, was tired of doing stuff like form validation and learning all these different tools. Like, okay, I use React, but I gotta learn React form hooks or formic. There's all these different tools and standards that you can adopt in that front end world. I just wanted to write my form validation once, have it work on both the front end and the back end, and just be done with it. And what's great is that Microsoft provides a lot of abstractions to a lot of these patterns, so that you can bring in third-party libraries without too much difficulty. And it's ubiquitous. You can put it on pretty much any platform you can think of. It's going to target even stuff like edge computing with the WebAssembly runtime, and mobile applications with Blazor now. And we're not going to talk too much about that today. So let's dive in and see how these applications work. So we'll start with Blazor Server. This is primarily where my experience lives. This is all centered around SignalR. And Blazor is, you look at kind of the mission statement online on the Microsoft Docs, and it seems very anti-JavaScript, but honestly, this really wouldn't be possible without any JavaScript at all. So at the real core of it, there is a Blazor Server.js that runs on your browser, and that's standing up the line of communication between the server and the browser. So that's really the centralized piece, and it's doing that through a SignalR real-time connection. So everything with WebSockets, work with those. This is all built on that type of architecture. And what they refer to that connection as called a circuit, right? So once a client connects to a browser, it creates what they call a circuit connection. That circuit is then persisted for the lifetime of that connection. You can do some stuff in the back end, like set up affinities and all that. So if you have a distributed architecture, you can set up custom logic to handle those circuits. I'll show you an example of how you can kind of start getting that rolling here pretty soon. And then there's a JS interop that runs in that Blazor Server.js. So you can actually execute .NET code from the front end. Vice versa, you can also execute JavaScript from the server as well. All these events are run through that SignalR connection. Blazor WASM is similar, but there's no real-time connection unless you specify for it. So this is more traditional to a typical front-end application. All of your assets are compiled to run and be interpreted by the .NET runtime, which is a version of that runtime that runs upon WebAssembly. So it's a specialized version of the .NET runtime that interprets your code and just in time compiles it to the browser. So it's the exact same kind of components that you write in the server architecture. However, it's being all sent and downloaded to the browser and then executed there. You can also stand up a SignalR connection. I'll talk a little bit about what they're called Blazor United, terrible name. That's going to be coming up here in .NET 8. That has it kind of switches hat between those two roles. But for the most part, this is going to be your more typical, single page application framework. You can also precompile this using AOT. Right now, they're doing some optimizations. The bundle size is huge for that. It's like over 100 megs. So not really the most ideal to be doing this and just get a WASM binary native. So they suggest that you use the .NET runtime for now until .NET 8. So hosting Blazor, pretty typical stuff between client server, the trade-offs, right? Server, you get server-side rendering. You can also pre-render some components using the server and have the browser take over the rest. So that's good to kind of optimize if you need, SEO or any kind of content pre-render. If there's a lot of data-intensive stuff you just want to ship, you can do that with Blazor Server. What's also great is all the interaction model is being shipped via binary messages from the browser over to the server. So, a lot of the logic and stuff that you want to run, you want to keep safe and hidden away from the client implementation. You can do all of that on the server and just do some messaging back and forth. It's really pretty performant, actually. And of course, I'll talk about SignalR. Again, WASM, very portable. You're basically building an entire application that can run offline, progressive. You don't need any kind of server present to run that application. So let's take a look at some code. Before we do that, any questions so far? The purpose of the talk is to be very casual, so if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Feel free to ask. So I have a couple of different examples here. You'll kind of notice the title. My previous talk was titled Unwrap Blazor. This one's called Blazor, This Is the Way. So it's kind of a weird hodgepodge of titling right now. A couple of projects in here. I got one dedicated just for the styles and that I was doing a custom bootstrap style. This is my common project here, stuff shared. Is this visible? Is this okay for you now?
Yeah.
So in here we just have stuff, just like a basic model. I got a chat thing I'll show you. I got a little search thing I'll show, and then some persistent stuff. State store, like many other frameworks, I don't believe there's any native state component as part of Blazor, so that's very much either roll your own or use one of the very many popular ones that are out there in the Blazor immediate ecosphere. I just decided to roll my own one here. It's pretty simple. And there are some pretty good examples. I think on Microsoft Docs, how you can implement your own basic one. I'll show you a thing about React here as well, but yeah, so the bulk of this is going to live in these two projects. So the Unwrap Blazor server project and the Unwrap Blazor Blazor project. So just a quick overview. These might look familiar. Not a whole lot different from a typical ASP.NET MVC application. You can stand up controllers. In this case, my server kind of plays both roles because I also provide APIs to the Blazor application as well. So this is kind of taking on both of those responsibilities. But the way that it's structured is you have you'll have pages, which these are basically like your top level views. And so I have a couple of different here. There's one for circuits, search, and chat. You have your host, CSHTML, this is where everything's wired up, right? So tag helpers, all that kind of stuff, lay out your head component, all your imports, and then obviously the key here is including the Blazor server.js. I believe there's 3 primary paths you'll see the browser making requests to. There's _framework, _Blazor for all of the real-time messaging, and it's also an _content as well for static content. So they'll basically take everything in your static folder and ship that off under, I think it's _content. What else we got here? Shared. So this is basically stuff you'll share between all of your components. So there is a concept of layout. I don't really do much here with this layout, but if you want to stand up like custom routing, authentication layers, if you want to kind of carve that stuff out, you would typically do that in your layout. And then you can also have shared components here as well. Structure for a component. You can build them a couple different ways. So in .NET World, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the code behind. You can do that as well. I think here in the circuits, I have an example. There's not really much here in this component, just a simple template where I render out a list of each circuit that's connected, and then there's a code behind. If you're familiar with this kind of naming convention, right? .razor.cs. In here is where you can write all your code behind for that. You can also include that in a @code, so you can choose to also put code in your component as well. I don't think, and this is something I really hope we get as a feature pretty soon, you can also include styles. I'm a big fan of like just grouping everything together, and especially for small components like this. I hope we can soon be able to merge in styles as well. But for now, what we can do is we can break each of those out. So you can have a Razor file with template and code, and then a separate, razor.css where you can have all your styles. What Blazor will do is it'll actually roll up all of these styles into one overall style sheet, and then it will give you a path on your content to basically pull all of your styles in. I'm not sure if you can separate those out just yet. That's the structure of the component. And WASM is very similar. There's not really all that much different in terms of how components are structured. The project's very similar. One was just on the www root. This is where all your static content's going to go and where it's going to serve everything from. And for that, pretty much everything else is the exact same. Pages, shared, all that stuff. Not a whole lot different there. And then index HTML is where you would wire everything up as opposed to the host CSHTML. So what does that look like in terms of, how does this run, how is this communicating? So I have both of these running right now, the server and the WASM. So I'll flip over to the server version. Sorry, it's a little cut off. I want to be able to showcase how this is kind of working in the background here. So I have kind of 4 areas of this application. Just some real basic stuff. So I have a search that's going to search against a SQLite database with a search index on it. I have some circuits, which you'll see is only one right now. I'm the only current client connected to this server. So just lists the unique IDs here in the circuits. I have a little chat application that I'll use with the WASM here in a second, and a little error boundary demo here. So that's the layout of the project for server. WASM is basically just a lighter in-depth search and chat. So I mentioned about how all this operates over a SignalR connection. So virtually every part of this application, right, from, there's logic on key entry, form submit, all this stuff, all being sent via SignalR back to the server for processing. It's handling all of our user interaction model. None of it's being processed actually on the server itself. So if I search for testing, so see down below, this is just pulling the awesome Blazor GitHub. If you're trying to look for a new tool, I highly recommend whatever technology you're working in, just Google awesome space that technology. There's typically a GitHub repo that has just hundreds, if not thousands of resources. So I'm just stealing that from GitHub here. So you'll see, let's switch over to the network tab. Web sockets, not much real estate here. You'll see that as I'm doing actions on the slide here, see it's generally these binary messages. And so this is what Blazor is doing behind the scenes. It's shipping all of these events in user interaction. It's basically invoking code back on the server from the front end using that interop. So there's logic on the back end, switch over to the search and show you, that's being executed from the browser via that SignalR. I believe it's using, I'm not sure what the native message formatting is. I want to say it is by default message pack, or you can use message pack to optimize those parcel sizes, but I think right now it's just sending just plain binary data. But you can opt in for something like message pack, or even use your own message formatter if you wanted to, obfuscate these messages even more easily could.
Is the SQLite database you're running on the server side, or is it embedded into the WASM?
Good question. You can do both. That's actually something I was going to talk about here briefly when I switch over to WASM. This is currently being connected to just using Entity Framework on the server right now. So just the files, the server's hooked up to that. I'll talk about the running SQL server or SQLite in the browser. That's actually something pretty cool that you can do with WASM. So flipping over to the search. So you'll see down here, down below, on search, submit async. All these events here are being captured from the browser user interaction model, being sent through the interop back to the backend and being processed here. We're just updating the local state of this component, and then it's going to go through and then render out all of the search results in that table. Nothing fancy, just a simple bootstrap table list of those resources. But yeah, so that's how servers currently operating. So not a whole lot of JavaScript happening here. You can also execute a little bit of JavaScript, which I do here in the chat. So again, leveraging the real-time framework that we already get in Blazor. I'm going to connect as my name here. And over in WASM, I'm also going to connect, say, WASM. See back and forth here. We're going to talk to and from. So this is connected over that same underlying connection. I think I should have a separate connection set up for this. Again, it's all using SignalR, but it's all the same components. Every component that's used on the server version is also being used on the WASM version there, which is nice. So if we decide we need to ship our code and make it a little bit more portable, we can very easily do that. All we have to do is make sure that our front-end client is able to connect and communicate with whatever our back-end is. Now, what I've learned recently, and I think is actually a really powerful solution, is you can actually host and use your Blazor components inside of other front-end applications. So this is a React application. You can actually run it, so we're not seeing the spinner. So what you can do in both Blazor Server and Blazor WASM, this is currently hosted with Blazor Server just to make it a little bit easier. to do some of the real-time stuff, is you can actually register your components as what they call root components. And what that does, let me show you. This is done in the program CS. So what that does is this allows you to follow the web components specification, and this will actually convert your components to the web component specification, which most modern front-end frameworks will adhere to. And then you can render your Blazor components inside of whether it be Angular, Vue, React, with very minimal plumbing. Not really a whole lot is needed. So just to show that, I think I took one of my components, it's the star field. It's basically my little logo that I tried to make with the Mandalorian helmet and some stars behind it. So that is now, we'll be running here in React. So React is just the default boilerplate React app, right? So then I can come into that React app. I basically just included a couple includes in the so here it's currently commented out. Next HTML, not a whole lot of plumbing here, just referencing Bootstrap so I can get some styling. The actual style sheet is generated by Blazor itself, and then down below I'm connecting to the Blazor framework and have a reference to, under content, there's a specific DLL needed that's used to take the, I'm sorry, it's not even a DLL, it's a JS library that's used to convert and interpret our DLL components into a web component renderable item. So I'm comment that. In my app. I think I have HMR on here. You can play around more with some of the, I think I rendered it twice. I think I rendered it twice. But yeah, so, I see I have the backgrounds repeat. So just like that, I can easily take a component that I have on the, inside of my Blazor application and serve that to a different front end. So you don't have to necessarily use Blazor at all on the front end. You can stand up stuff on your back end. Maybe you've got some more things like rich interactivity, logging forms, stuff that requires just a lot of it's a slog to build that stuff time and time again. Always, like in the enterprise world, we don't really build like super high dynamic UI. It's a lot of stuff like forms and validation and workflow. So being able to do that in one place and share that across other applications is just worth its weight in gold. So yeah, just like that, I can also, instead of using the star field, I can opt in to do, just throw in the search then. Say I've got an application search, so a mini search somewhere on my, on one of my enterprise applications. I want to bring that over to a new front-end React app that we're building, just like that. Refresh. Now I have that exact same component set, complete with user interaction model, no programming in React required, just drop it in, done. So I was thinking last night, I was going to try and be fancy. I'm like, well, I have this chat, maybe it could be kind of cool. So my wife built the CPOS website for this event. I thought maybe I could it's open source, maybe I could throw the chat into there. So I was playing around with that last night, hold down the source for the CPOS site. Unfortunately, it's a little easier with React to set up. This is, again, another reason why I'm happy with my switch. It's setting up proxies to backends is drastically different between all these different front-end frameworks. But I was able to get the search working on the C++ site as well. So I had a little search tab in here. Yeah, go for it. Question? Yeah, oh, sorry, man. Go for it.
Yeah, so the way Blazor, so how does Blazor work pattern-wise? So in React, everything's organized by containers and components. Is Blazor very similar in that regard?
Mm-hmm. So you mean as in like how you would compose components in like a hierarchical layout like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's all very much the exact same. They have very similar kind of concepts as React. React's honestly, I think, a big driver in a lot of the concepts that are in Blazor today. It supports stuff like context. You can do all the anti-patterns like prop drilling, should you choose, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it doesn't really make any assumptions about how you build applications like that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
See, same thing here. So this is the C+ site. Just added a little search thing, and then just like that, very much it's the same set. It includes some styles, and then I just dropped in that web component, just like that. This is all operating again over that real-time connection provided by the Blazor framework JS. You can also do this with WASM. It's not quite as automated. So with WASM, you can publish your application with the components registered the exact same way, but then you have to copy over a lot of that stuff into your static directory. And the includes are very similar. You just include that local JS file. There's one other one as well. It's just a little cumbersome. So if you've got like a DevOps pipeline, let's say you've got a lot of components that you want to, if you're working with Blazor WASM, you want to bring that to other applications that maybe your other teams are building in React or Vue. Doesn't really matter. It could be vanilla JS, doesn't matter. Anything browsers will adhere to the web components framework, so you can easily drop in these pretty much anywhere. Let's jump back to the slides. Any question on code or any more clarifications? Yeah.
I know that like working with front-end framework with like React or Vue or something, you can spend a lot of time doing network tab debugging, network calls. What does debugging look like with Blazor? Obviously, those network calls are very obfuscated. I'm just kind of curious what that debugging experience is like if you're running into a problem and you're trying to figure out where it's coming from.
Yeah, in the .NET world, Microsoft world, F5 was pretty much that.
So it's all just .NET then.
Yep. It's the debugging experience in Blazor Server is just like you would experience in any other version or any other framework that Microsoft offers. WASM's a little bit different. There are extensions to that, and you also are limited in the quality of the information that you can get, because again, a lot of that's working through that JavaScript interop. So the power that you get, like I think Visual Studio is probably one of the most powerful debugging platforms out there. You lose a lot of that with WASM, so you might be relying more on, the stuff that you're debugging now on front end. I don't think you lose any of that, but in terms of like the stuff that you get natively out of Visual Studio, it's not going to be quite as good.
Okay.
So when you ran Blazor server in React, how did you serve the Blazor? Did you serve it alongside React, or did you have a separate service running?
Yeah, so this is, right now this is just the Blazor server running. I just connected to my instance of the Blazor server. So yeah, that's basically the single page app, right? That has, this is just a dev server, so like that server is running, but then I proxy them, so it's all through the same dev server itself, and then it proxies out to the Blazor instance that's currently running. Yeah, I just started playing around with this with the web components earlier this week. This is a relatively recent thing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
One question back there, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah.
Do you need a back end in order to run Blazor, or can you compile it? But can it just run completely by itself in WASM?
Yes, it can run completely by itself in WASM. Yeah. You can write all the same components that you would in Blazor server, and then the only difference is that user interaction model, all that stuff is still processed by a .NET runtime, but it all runs offline, disconnected from a server in the browser. And then you can implement your services, like in that case for search, like in Blazor, I'm just connected directly to my search service, right? I just inject that and then I just use I just use that service through the interaction model right on the server. And then I have an implementation for the WASM, which is just an HTTP client. And that's just basically doing REST calls instead of having that real-time interaction.
Yeah, my second question was if I wanted to run Blazor server from a .NET Framework website, can I combine those two, or how would you do that? So I want to run a Blazor site that's running inside of a Angular site that's running from .NET Framework.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I can, wow.
Yeah, and like I said, you could run it either way. I think in that approach, it might be better to do something like Blazor WASM, where you build your components in Blazor, but on the WASM version, we're not relying on that server for that interaction model. Compile them down to a native WASM binary, and then include those static files into your Angular application, and then you just use the web component version.
But like that package is big, and I was wondering if server would help
Yeah, that's, so with .NET 8 coming out, I think we're in release candidate 1 right now of .NET 8. So, this is very, like, the whole ahead of time compilation, very popular in like the Angular world. They're implementing a lot of that as
Mhm.
well. Like, they'll use, I think, actually in the dev messages, or in the console messages, I think, for WASM, like, there's no tree shaking or anything like that done. Like, it's 15 megs now without, like, when you compile stuff ahead of time, it's, like I said, I think it's around, it depends on your application, but just like the native, just basic application that you build from the template is like almost 100 megs. Once you tack on all frameworking and that, get that all into one WASM binary. So kind of large, but they're working on really cutting back on those overall sizes. We'll talk about Blazor United here in a second, 'cause that's kind of a cool approach that solves both of these problems. Any other questions? Go back to slides. All right, so Blazor's been really exciting for me just in the past couple of years using it. It's been able to take a lot of what I've learned and loved about using modern front-end frameworks like React and bringing that over to the Microsoft landscape, being able to write compositionally, with components and all that kind of stuff, using state stores, all that. So it's been a real gift. So there's improvements coming to the WASM bundle sizes, as well as AOT performance improvements to bring those bundle sizes down to be very small. And I mentioned Steve Sanderson earlier. He's doing a lot of stuff in WASM, getting that runtime. So there's it's called the Bytecode Alliance. So there's a kind of an open standard called WASI, which basically seeks to take any runtime and make it available on any architecture. Doesn't matter, for the edge, for the any mainframe, doesn't matter. So you can basically build your code to compile it into WASM native binaries and use the WASI to run it on virtually anything.
WASI and WAGI have not been ratified to standard. Also, it's Bytecode Alliance. They're working with WASM Time and WASMer,
Yeah.
but they haven't. They have some stuff which is one of the more mature frameworks I've looked at.
Yep. Last time is what I'm using.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely more because I think that WASMer has kind of been ignored since WASM Time's been getting a lot of interest. So yeah, definitely make sure though that with the WASI standard though, you are essentially replacing the runtime with .NET Virtual Machine with some other runtime you're trying to work with.
Yep.
And they're trying to work on that spec or how they want to interface with it.
Right.
I question what kind of gain you get out of that, out of moving out of your, for the server side, but it's there.
I think a lot of the real excitement we're going to see is still yet to come. There's still a lot of that. It's still very much like super preview and all that kind of stuff.
I'm literally talking about that, the open source summit in about a month.
Really? Awesome. So they're also going to be introducing some things like running threads in WASM, Blazor and JS capabilities. This was back when I did this talk last year. This was something that was still new. I gave this talk just before .NET 7 was released, so that's officially supported now in .NET 7. That's just demo. They've also included stuff like dynamic auth for WASM. They've also built in their own DA grid component, so no longer having to go and spend $1 million on telework licenses to get a decent data grid or roll your own and suffer. Import other languages. So I think there's a question about running SQLite in WASM. I did have a demo sort of prepared for that, but unfortunately, you have to seed that database. So you can actually, there is a library that compiles SQLite from C into a WASM binary, and you can easily load that into the WASM. I'm able to do it, but I don't have the database seeded. So you can actually stand up an entire SQL database into your front-end code, and you have to pre-seed that data. I think once it's seeded, though, it will stay cached. So you could potentially do some SQL on the browser. But there's also other things you can do. Like there's stuff like QR code scanning, barcode scanning, a lot of stuff that really might require some user interaction through like IO devices like camera and microphone that might require some processing in special libraries you might not have available in .NET. Maybe it's in Rust or Go. Any of those languages that can compile to a WASM native binary can potentially be imported into your front-end application. So you can get a nice mixture of different tools and capabilities all under WASM. So a quick summary. I find Blazor to be really experienced. They've taken a lot of keys from really powerful front-end frameworks today and built what I think is an awesome framework on top of some of the best paradigms that we have to date. It's very speedy in performance. My first POC was building a new enterprise search on top of Elastic, and I was using Blazor server, and when we published our Elastic server to the cloud, it was still like insanely fast. Even processing the user interaction model to our server, doing the request and sending it back was all sub half a second time. So no issues with any kind of like hosting the user interaction model on a server. No concerns about performance there at all. And their aim, I think, is to make this tool, this framework, very ubiquitous, especially through the WASM and the WASM runtime. It seems to be where a lot of the energy is the .NET runtime is available on most major platforms, but I think they're really looking to use some of these newer concepts and newer initiatives in WebAssembly to bring it all the way up to edge compute. Probably not going to record any questions. Some resources. I'll share these slides on the CPOS channel. Are there any Slack admins in the room? Yeah. So if nobody's on the Tech Lancaster Slack, please reach out to Jake and get signed up for that. And there's a CPOS channel. I'll make sure to share these slides so you can get those. Resources. And I'll take questions. And otherwise, we're free to break for lunch. Any questions? Yeah.
Is there a GitHub with these on repo?
Sorry, what was that?
Are these on any GitHub repo?
Yeah, I have a private repo with these projects. I'll make it public. There's really no reason to make it private. I just do that by default. Yeah, I can absolutely do that. Yeah. Questions? Yeah.
So currently working in React, so I'm fairly new to it, and you mentioned prop drilling. You can do the same thing in there. Is there any like built-in way with Blazor to kind of get around that? Because I personally kind of like having to do prop drilling, really knowing a couple of things more than.
Yeah. I'll just give an example. Like you can fall into a lot of the same pitfalls because Blazor doesn't really make any assumptions about how you're going to control your state. So yeah, you can make state stores that you can inject throughout your application. That's how I've typically done things. There's also a built-in context as well. So you can have like basically a cascading prop that goes all the way down through your application, and then you can pull that property in at any point. So you just use an attribute called, I think it's just cascading property, and it'll pull that value off of your context. So if you want something to be available to parts of your component hierarchy or the entire thing, let's say auth state perhaps, I think a lot of the native .NET, like I know specifically with auth, they take advantage of using cascading properties. Question back there?
Yeah, I was curious if like maybe you have recommendations or maybe you've seen it or run into it, but like with limitations with performance or scalability with either like server side versus client side for different applications.
Yeah, I really haven't done a whole lot of WASM. It just seems to be a little bit prohibitive for the kind of applications that we're building. Most of our front-end applications are in React, but we are very seriously taking a look at building out our stuff like forms. We have like some chatbot stuff that is very tied to some of the backend. So we're looking at potentially using the .NET 7, the ability to use web components and just drop those into our existing React applications. There's still a lot of value that you can get out of React. It's our applications that have more rich, JavaScript interaction model. We don't want to necessarily abandon all the effort that we put into that. So that's really the only pitfall that I've found so far. It's a little tricky to get started without some sample code. I've done a lot of training in Blazor. I've done a lot of personal research on how to optimize and build. I'm very much like a clean architecture person, so you can very much architect your way to hell. That's probably the only pitfall, is just plastic .NET stuff. Yeah.
So you said that you can use these components in React apps, right? So have you ever tried experimenting Blazor components with Redux?
Blazor components with Redux.
Yeah.
So there are implementations of Redux for Blazor itself.
Okay.
I haven't tried to use Redux like the state store with. You can pass in attributes and properties. Like I think on the where was it? I think I forget which application it was. It might have been the React application where I dropped in my my little logo thing.
Yeah.
That accepts properties for size and all that. I think you can easily drop in properties that you can pull out of Redux, so they can pull your state in and operate it as long as it's the same shape as what you got out of .NET. Yeah, I think Any other questions?
One more.
Yeah.
So what do you see, like, so this makes sense for people running on .NET. What are the, like, what are you seeing for other, shops that run different, kind of backends, like a Go backend or a Python backend? What's the answer for those platforms that are saying, this is so cool as a concept?
Right. I think that's really probably one of the harder sells, is a company that's already invested in another backend. I think they're really trying to target the JavaScript world. And per se, it was easy for me to flip over to .NET, just seeing some of the new things that they were building into their SDKs. I was getting so close to those kinds of requirements that was, in Nest.js and all the kinds of things that they offered there. I was like, well, I might as well just flip to something that has a lot of support and it's not necessarily all strictly community built. So that's I think the primary way into those spaces would probably be through WebAssembly. Primarily because a lot of other languages can also build WebAssembly as well. But maybe they don't have a runtime that they can operate in WebAssembly as effectively. So that's probably, I would say that's the advantage of using Blazor in this kind of circumstances. But at that point, they're competing against tools like React, so it's kind of a tricky one there. Any other questions? Very good. Well, thanks so much for your time. I think we're just about at time, we're pretty close. So.